I found my son on his knees, scrubbing a toilet in the executive bathroom of Grupo Industrial Ochoa. His father-in-law stood in the doorway, arms crossed, that smirk plastered across his face like he'd just won the lottery. Rodrigo Ochoa, one of the richest men in Mexico City. And there was Vicente, my boy, the one I raised alone after his father died, the one I worked 3 jobs to put through engineering school, down on his knees with a brush in his hand and chemical cleaner burning his skin. Rodrigo saw me standing there, and he actually laughed. He said it loud enough for the other executives walking by to hear. He said, "This is all your son knows how to do, Amelia. This is his level. This is where he belongs." I looked at Vicente's face, and I saw something I'd never seen before. Shame. Deep, burning shame. Not because he was cleaning a bathroom. There's no shame in honest work. But shame because his wife's father had made this public, had turned my son into a lesson, a warning, entertainment for the other men in expensive suits. That's when I made the call. One single phone call that would flip everything upside down and show Rodrigo Ochoa exactly who really held the power in this city. How does a mother watch her son be destroyed in public by the very family he married into? What do you do when the people who should lift your child up are the ones grinding him into the ground? And how far will I go to protect the dignity of the boy I raised alone? The boy I sacrificed everything for? The boy whose only crime was falling in love with the wrong man's daughter? If this story has already touched your heart, subscribe now, leave a like, and tell me in the comments what city you're watching from. Vicente wasn't always on his knees scrubbing toilets. He was brilliant. Top of his class at UNAM, degree in industrial engineering, internships at serious companies. But he met Sophia at a wedding 3 years ago, and everything changed. She was beautiful, yes, but more than that, she was kind. Or at least, I thought she was kind. She laughed at his jokes. She didn't care that we lived in a small apartment in Narvarte, that I worked as a bookkeeper for a textile distributor, that we didn't have a car or a vacation house in Cuernavaca. She said she loved him for who he was. And Vicente, my sweet boy, he believed her. He believed in love. Maybe that was my fault. Maybe I raised him too soft, too trusting, too willing to see the good in people. His father died when Vicente was 7. Heart attack. No warning. One day he kissed us goodbye and went to work at the construction site, and by afternoon, I was at the hospital watching them cover his face with a white sheet. After that, it was just me and Vicente. I took extra shifts. I learned English at night so I could get better paying jobs. I saved every peso I could. I kept his father's old jacket hanging in the closet because Vicente liked to smell it sometimes when he missed him, and I made him a promise. I promised him he would never have to break his back the way his father did. He would study. He would use his mind. He would have a better life. When Vicente graduated, I cried so hard I couldn't breathe. We celebrated with tacos from the stand near our building and a cheap bottle of champagne. He got his first job offer 2 weeks later. Good salary. Real benefits. A future. But then he met Sophia, and 6 months later they were engaged. I should have seen it coming. I should have noticed how her family looked at us at the engagement party, how her mother, Christina, barely touched my hand when we were introduced, how Rodrigo asked what I did for a living and then nodded slowly, like he was filing away information for later use, how Sophia's brothers made jokes I didn't quite understand but felt in my stomach. But Vicente was happy. And isn't that what a mother wants? So I kept my mouth shut. I wore my best dress to the wedding. I smiled for the photos. I didn't say a word when Rodrigo announced during the reception that Vicente would be joining Grupo Industrial Ochoa as a junior analyst. A wedding gift, he called it. A chance to prove himself in the family business. Vicente looked at me across that enormous salon in Las Lomas, past the ice sculptures and the towers of champagne glasses and the live orchestra, and his eyes were shining. He thought his luck had finally turned. He thought he'd married into a family that would help him rise. I wanted to believe it too. But that night, after the party ended and I took a taxi back to Narvarte alone, I sat in my small kitchen with a cup of coffee, and I felt something cold settle in my chest. A warning, a whisper. This is going to cost him something you can't imagine yet. The wedding was on a Saturday in November. By the following Monday, Vicente started at Grupo Industrial Ochoa, and within 2 weeks, I knew something was wrong. He came to visit me on a Sunday afternoon, which he never did anymore because Sophia preferred they spend weekends at her parents' estate. He looked tired, thin. He sat at my kitchen table and didn't eat the chilaquiles I'd made. He just stared at his plate. I asked him what was wrong and he said nothing. He said he was fine. He said he was learning the business, that Rodrigo was tough but fair, that it was an adjustment. But his hands were shaking. I reached across the table and took his wrist, and I asked him again, "What is happening?" And he finally told me. They weren't training him as an analyst. They had him doing inventory in the warehouse, cleaning equipment, running errands, fetching coffee, filing papers. And when he tried to ask about actual engineering work, about projects, about using his degree, Rodrigo told him he needed to understand the business from the ground up, that he needed to earn his place, that marrying the boss's daughter didn't mean he could skip the hard work. Vicente said it made sense. He said maybe Rodrigo was right. Maybe he needed to be humble. But I looked at my son's face, and I knew this wasn't about humility. This wasn't about learning. This was about putting him in his place. 3 months later, it got worse. Rodrigo started assigning Vicente to clean the executive bathrooms. He said the cleaning staff was unreliable. He said Vicente should take pride in every job, no matter how small. And because Vicente loved Sophia, because he wanted to prove himself, because he believed that hard work would eventually be rewarded, he did it. He scrubbed toilets. He mopped floors. He emptied trash cans in offices where men, half as educated as him, made decisions about millions of pesos. And every time I saw him, he looked smaller. Every time he came to visit, there was less light in his eyes. Sophia stopped coming with him. She said she was busy. She said her mother needed help planning some charity event. She said she'd see me soon, but she never did. And slowly, I started to understand. This wasn't just Rodrigo. This was all of them. This was the whole family slowly grinding my son down, turning him into something they could control, something they could point to and say, "See, this is what happens when you reach above your station. This is what you get when you try to climb into our world without permission." But there's something they didn't know. Something I never told Vicente because I didn't want him growing up thinking money was the most important thing. When his father died, the construction company fought the insurance payout. They said it wasn't a workplace accident. They said it was a pre-existing condition. They offered me nothing, so I hired a lawyer, a good one. It took 2 years, but we won. And the settlement was significant. Not millionaire money, not Ochoa money, but enough. I put most of it away. I invested it carefully. I bought a small commercial property in an older neighborhood, nothing fancy, just a 2-story building with 4 rental units. I used the income to pay for Vicente's education and to build a cushion, a safety net, something that would protect us if things ever fell apart. I never touched the principal. I never told Vicente the full amount. I wanted him to work for what he had. I wanted him to build his own life, but I also kept records. Every document, every contract, every receipt, because I learned something after his father died. I learned that the world doesn't respect tears. It respects proof. It respects paper. It respects the law when you know how to use it. Now the wedding anniversary was coming up, their first year. Rodrigo was planning a party, a big one. He'd already sent invitations to half of Mexico City's business elite. He'd reserved a private room at a hotel in Polanco. He'd hired photographers and caterers and a band. And he made it very clear that this party was about family, about legacy, about showing the world that the Ochoa family was strong, united, successful, which meant Vicente needed to look the part. He needed to stand next to Sophia and smile and pretend that everything was perfect, that he was happy, that he was grateful, that he belonged. I got my invitation in the mail, thick cream-colored cardstock, gold lettering. My name spelled correctly, but my address written in a way that made it clear someone had looked it up rather than asked. I held that invitation in my hands, and I thought about what it would be like to walk into that party and see my son pretending. See him standing there in a borrowed suit, probably, next to Rodrigo and Cristina and their sons and their friends, all of them knowing exactly what Vicente did during his days at Grupo Industrial Ochoa. All of them knowing he was the son-in-law who cleaned their toilets. And I made a decision. I wasn't going to let this party happen the way Rodrigo planned it. I wasn't going to let him use my son as a prop in his perfect family portrait. That anniversary party was 6 weeks away, and I had work to do. I started by calling my lawyer. His name was Javier Ruiz, and he'd handled the insurance case after Vicente's father died. He was older now, semi-retired, but still sharp. I told him I needed to understand something about business structures and corporate governance. I told him I wanted to know how companies like Grupo Industrial Ochoa actually worked, who owned what, how decisions were made, how shares were distributed, how families maintained control. Javier listened without interrupting, and then he asked me the right question. He asked me what I was really trying to find out, so I told him. I told him about Vicente, about the bathrooms, about Rodrigo's smirk, about the anniversary party that was really just a stage for more humiliation, and Javier was quiet for a long moment. Then he said something I'll never forget. He said, "Amelia, men like Rodrigo Ochoa don't just abuse people because they enjoy it. They do it because they're afraid. They do it because somewhere, somehow, they feel threatened. And if you want to protect Vicente, you need to figure out what Rodrigo is really afraid of." That sent me down a path I never expected. I started doing research, real research. I went to the Public Business Registry. I looked up Grupo Industrial Ochoa's corporate filings. I found old newspaper articles about the company's founding, about Rodrigo's father, about how the business had grown over the decades. And I found something interesting. The company had almost collapsed 15 years ago. Bad investments, bad partnerships, a scandal involving environmental violations at one of their plants. They'd been fined heavily. They'd lost contracts. The stock price had tanked, and Rodrigo had taken over as CEO right in the middle of that crisis. He'd saved the company, yes. He'd restructured. He'd brought in new investors. He'd rebuilt the reputation. But he'd done it by giving up a significant portion of control. Outside investors now held almost 40% of the company, which meant Rodrigo's hold on Grupo Industrial Ochoa wasn't as absolute as it appeared, which meant he was constantly performing strength, constantly proving his worth, constantly needing to look untouchable. And that's when I understood. Vicente wasn't just a son-in-law to Rodrigo. He was a test case, a way to show everyone, including those outside investors, that Rodrigo controlled everything and everyone in his orbit, that he could take an educated engineer and turn him into a janitor and nobody would stop him, that his power was absolute. But here's what Rodrigo didn't know. One of those outside investors was an old friend of Vicente's father. His name was Mauricio Delgado. He'd worked construction with Vicente's father back in the day, and when the insurance settlement came through, I'd reached out to him for advice on investing. Mauricio had done well for himself, very well. He'd started his own construction company, then moved into commercial real estate, then into business consulting. And about 10 years ago, when Grupo Industrial Ochoa was desperate for capital, Mauricio had been one of the people who'd stepped in. He owned 12% of the company, which didn't sound like much until you understood that with the shares so distributed, 12% could swing major decisions. 12% made you someone who needed to be listened to. I hadn't spoken to Mauricio in years, but I still had his number. And I still remembered that he'd told me once, at Vicente's graduation party, that if I ever needed anything, truly needed anything, I should call. So I called. And when he answered and I told him who I was, he remembered immediately. He asked about Vicente, and I told him everything. I told him about the bathrooms, about Rodrigo's cruelty, about the anniversary party, about my fear that my son was being slowly destroyed in public and that everyone was just watching it happen. Mauricio was quiet for a long time. Then he said, "I'm very sorry this is happening, Amelia. I had no idea, and I'm going to do something about it." 2 weeks before the anniversary party, Vicente came to see me. He looked worse than ever. His skin was grayish. His eyes were hollow. He'd lost weight. He sat at my kitchen table and he cried. Actually cried. He told me he couldn't do it anymore. He told me Rodrigo had him cleaning bathrooms in front of clients now. That Rodrigo had made a joke about it during a board meeting. That the other executives had laughed. That Sofia had been there and she'd laughed too. Not a big laugh, Vicente said. Just a small one. Just enough to show she was on her father's side. And Vicente said he felt like he was disappearing, like he was becoming exactly what Rodrigo wanted him to be. Nothing. Nobody. A cautionary tale. I held my son while he cried, and I felt something break open inside me. Not sadness. Rage. Pure, cold rage. But I didn't let him see it. I just stroked his hair like I used to when he was small, and I told him everything was going to be okay. I told him I needed him to trust me. I told him to go to that anniversary party and hold his head up and smile and be polite and not react no matter what Rodrigo said or did. And Vicente looked at me like I was crazy. He said, "Mom, I can't. I can't keep pretending." And I said, "You're not going to have to pretend much longer. Just trust me. Please." That night, I met with Javier and Mauricio at a quiet restaurant near Chapultepec. We sat in a corner booth where no one could hear us, and we made a plan. Mauricio explained that he'd been concerned about Rodrigo's management style for a while now, that there had been complaints, that some of the other investors were worried about workplace culture, about ethics, about the risk of lawsuits, that Rodrigo's need to publicly dominate people was creating exposure for the company, and Mauricio had been documenting everything, emails, complaints, reports. He said if we could get clear evidence of what Rodrigo was doing to Vicente, documented proof of systematic workplace abuse, he could use that to force a vote among the investors, not to remove Rodrigo entirely, but to put restrictions on him, to require oversight, to create accountability, and maybe, just maybe, to create enough pressure that Rodrigo would understand he couldn't treat people like disposable objects anymore. Javier added something else. He said if Vicente wanted to file a formal complaint, if he wanted to pursue legal action for workplace harassment and emotional abuse, the case would be strong, very strong, especially because Rodrigo had made it so public, especially because there were witnesses, dozens of them. But Javier also said that going that route would be brutal. It would mean depositions, court appearances, media attention, and it would mean Vicente would have to relive every humiliation in detail. So we needed to think carefully about what outcome we really wanted. I thought about that all night. I thought about justice, about revenge, about protection, about what would actually help Vicente rebuild his life versus what would just make me feel better. And I realized something. I didn't want to destroy Rodrigo. I didn't want to drag him through court or ruin his company or make him suffer the way he'd made Vicente suffer. That would make me just like him. What I wanted was simpler. I wanted him to understand that he didn't own my son, that he couldn't break people without consequences. That dignity matters more than money. And I wanted Vicente to see that fighting back was possible, that he didn't have to accept abuse just because it came from someone powerful, that he had people who would stand with him. So I told Mauricio and Javier what I wanted. I wanted Rodrigo confronted, clearly, publicly, but with dignity. I wanted him to know that his behavior had been documented and that it had consequences. And I wanted Vicente offered a real position, with real responsibility and real respect, or the option to leave with his reputation intact and references that would get him hired anywhere he wanted. And if Rodrigo refused, then we'd move forward with the formal complaint and let the courts decide. The anniversary party arrived. I wore a simple black dress, nothing fancy. I wasn't trying to compete with Christina's designer gown or Sophia's jewelry. I just wanted to be there, to witness, to be ready. The hotel ballroom was stunning. White orchids everywhere, candles, a string quartet, tables set with china and crystal. All of Rodrigo's business associates, his country club friends, his society connections. And there, near the entrance, greeting everyone like a king receiving tribute, stood Rodrigo himself, tall, silver-haired, perfectly tailored suit, that same smirk. When he saw me, something flickered across his face. Surprise, maybe, like he hadn't expected me to actually come. But he recovered quickly. He walked over and took my hand and said, "Amelia, how wonderful that you could join us. You look lovely." His voice was smooth, charming, and completely empty. I looked him in the eye and I said, "Thank you for inviting me, Rodrigo. I'm very glad to be here. I wouldn't miss this for the world." Vicente and Sofia were standing near the center of the room. Sofia looked beautiful. Vicente looked like he wanted to disappear. He was wearing a suit that didn't quite fit right. His smile didn't reach his eyes. When he saw me, he relaxed slightly, like my presence gave him permission to breathe. I walked over and hugged him. I hugged him tight, and I whispered in his ear, "Just hold on a little longer. Everything's going to change tonight." He pulled back and looked at me with confusion and maybe a little bit of fear. But before he could ask what I meant, Rodrigo was calling everyone to their seats. Dinner was being served. The program was beginning. The meal was elaborate. course after course. Rodrigo stood up between courses to make toasts. To family, to success, to the future. He talked about how proud he was of Sofia, how grateful he was for his wonderful wife, Cristina, who'd supported him through everything, how excited he was about the next generation of Ochoas who would carry on the family legacy. He didn't mention Vicente once, not once, and I watched as Vicente's face got tighter and tighter, as Sofia reached for his hand under the table and he pulled away, as the other guests whispered and glanced in their direction. This was the performance. This was Rodrigo showing everyone that Vicente didn't matter, that he was barely part of this family, that he was lucky to even be in the room. Then came the speeches from friends and family. Rodrigo's business partner talked about legacy and loyalty. Cristina's sister talked about the beauty of marriage and commitment. And then Rodrigo stood up again. He said he wanted to share something personal, something about the importance of knowing your place in the world, about understanding that success comes from humility and hard work and accepting that not everyone is meant to lead. Some people, he said, are meant to support, to serve, to do the small tasks that keep things running. And there's no shame in that, he said. We need people at every level. He looked directly at Vicente while he said it, and people noticed. I saw them notice. I saw them look at Vicente. I saw some of them start to smile, like they were in on the joke. And Vicente just sat there, frozen, his face burning red. And Sofia did nothing, said nothing, just looked down at her plate. That's when Mauricio stood up. He was sitting 3 tables away. Most people didn't even know who he was. He was just another guest. But when he stood, something in his presence made people go quiet. He said, "Excuse me, Rodrigo. I hope you don't mind if I say a few words." Rodrigo looked surprised, but he gestured for Mauricio to go ahead, probably thinking it was another toast, another round of praise. Mauricio walked to the center of the room. He said, "I want to thank you for inviting me tonight. I've known the Ochoa family for many years. I'm an investor in Grupo Industrial Ochoa, and I care deeply about the company's future, which is why I need to address something that's been troubling me. You talk about humility, Rodrigo, about hard work, about knowing your place. But I've been hearing some concerning things about how you treat the people who work for you, specifically how you treat your son-in-law, Vicente." The room went silent, completely silent. Rodrigo's face went white, then red. He said, "I don't think this is the appropriate time or place." Mauricio said, "I think it's exactly the right time and place, because you've made Vicente's humiliation public. You've turned his suffering into entertainment for your friends and colleagues. So I think the people here deserve to know the truth. Vicente graduated top of his class with an engineering degree. He's intelligent, capable, skilled, but instead of using those skills, you've had him cleaning bathrooms, running errands, performing tasks specifically designed to humiliate him. And you've done it openly, proudly, like it's some kind of lesson." Rodrigo tried to interrupt, but Mauricio kept talking. He said, "I've been documenting workplace complaints at Grupo Industrial Ochoa, talking to employees, reviewing management practices, and what I've found is a pattern of abuse, of using power to degrade people, of creating a toxic environment where fear and humiliation are management tools. And that's not just morally wrong, Rodrigo. It's legally actionable. It's a liability to every investor in this company, and it stops now." People were whispering, pulling out their phones. Cristina was standing up, saying something about this being inappropriate, about handling things privately. But Mauricio wasn't done. He said, "Vicente deserves a formal apology in front of all these people who witnessed his humiliation. And he deserves a real position in the company, with real responsibilities and real respect, or the option to leave with 6 months severance and references that reflect his actual qualifications. And if you're not willing to do that, then I'm calling for an emergency vote among the investors to review your management practices and consider structural changes to company leadership." The room exploded, everyone talking at once. Rodrigo was shouting something about betrayal and disrespect. Cristina was crying. Sofia was standing frozen, looking between her father and her husband like she couldn't process what was happening. And then I stood up. I didn't shout. I didn't raise my voice. I just stood up and I walked to where Vicente was sitting, and I put my hand on his shoulder. And I looked at Rodrigo, and I said, "My son is worth 10 of you. He's worth 100 of you. You tried to break him because you're afraid of what he could become if you actually let him grow. Because you know he's smarter than you, kinder than you, better than you, and you couldn't stand it, but you failed. He's still here. He's still standing. And now everyone in this room knows exactly who you are. I turned to Vicente. I said, let's go. You don't need to stay here. You don't need their approval or their money or their name. You have something they'll never have. You have dignity. And that's worth more than all of this. Vicente stood up. His hands were shaking, but his face was clear. He looked at Sofia. He said, I love you, but I can't do this anymore. I can't be married to someone who won't defend me, who won't stand up for me, who chooses her father's cruelty over our life together. If you want to be with me, really be with me, then you need to make a choice. But I'm not staying in this family if this is what family means. Then he walked out. I walked out with him. And Mauricio walked out with us. Behind us, the party dissolved into chaos. But we didn't look back. We walked through the hotel lobby, out into the Mexico City night, and we just stood there on the sidewalk breathing in the cool air. Vicente was crying, not from sadness, from relief, like something that had been crushing his chest for a year had finally lifted. He said, Mom, what just happened? And I said, justice happened. Quiet, careful, strategic justice, the kind that comes from knowing your worth and refusing to let anyone take it from you. The next morning, Vicente moved back into my apartment in Narvarte, the small place he'd grown up in, the place he'd been embarrassed to bring Sofia to when they first started dating. But now it felt like home again, like safety. Mauricio called that afternoon. He said Rodrigo had agreed to everything. Vicente would be given a real position as an industrial engineer reporting directly to the operations manager, not to Rodrigo. Real projects, real responsibility. Or, if Vicente preferred, he could resign with 6 months' salary and references that would get him hired anywhere. Plus, a formal written apology. Plus, a commitment from Rodrigo to undergo management training and submit to oversight from the board of investors. It wasn't total victory. Rodrigo was still CEO. He was still powerful, but he'd been put on notice, and everyone knew it. Word had spread from that anniversary party like wildfire. By the end of the week, half of Mexico City's business community had heard some version of the story. And the version that stuck wasn't Rodrigo's version. It was the truth. Vicente thought about the offer for 3 days. Then he called Mauricio and said he wanted the resignation option. He said he didn't want to work for Rodrigo ever again, under any circumstances. He wanted to start fresh somewhere else, somewhere he could use his education and his skills without the weight of that family hanging over him. Mauricio understood. He made some calls. Within 2 weeks, Vicente had 3 job offers, real ones, at serious companies that wanted engineers, not janitors. He accepted a position at an industrial consulting firm. Good salary, room to grow, respect. And he started to look like himself again. The color came back to his face. The light came back to his eyes. He started sleeping through the night. He even started laughing again. Sofia called him twice. The first time she cried and said she was sorry. She said she didn't know it had gotten so bad. She said her father had told her Vicente needed to be toughened up, that it was for his own good, that he was being too sensitive. She said she'd believed her father because she'd never seen him be cruel before. She asked Vicente to forgive her, to give her another chance. Vicente listened quietly, and then he said, I forgive you, Sofia, but forgiveness doesn't mean reconciliation. You chose your father over me every single time. You watched me suffer, and you did nothing, and that's not something I can forget. The second time she called, she was angry. She said he'd humiliated her family, that he'd destroyed her parents' reputation, that he was selfish and ungrateful, that he'd used her to get close to her father's company and then betrayed them all. Vicente hung up on her that time, and he blocked her number. 6 months later, they were divorced. I wish I could say that Rodrigo learned his lesson and changed completely. But that's not how life works. He's still CEO of Grupo Industrial Ochoa. He's still wealthy. He still moves in the same circles. But something did change. His reputation. The story got out. And now when people talk about Rodrigo Ochoa, they don't just talk about his business success. They also talk about what happened at his daughter's anniversary party, about how he treated his son-in-law, about how he was publicly called out by an investor. And in a city like Mexico City, where relationships and reputation mean everything, that matters. He lost some contracts, some partnerships, some social standing. Not enough to ruin him, but enough to remind him that power has limits, that cruelty has consequences, that the people you step on have families who love them, who remember, who will fight back when the time is right. As for Vicente, he thrived. Within a year at the consulting firm, he was leading projects. Within 2 years, he was promoted to senior engineer. He started traveling for work, visiting factories and plants all over Mexico and Latin America, solving problems, designing systems, using everything he'd studied for. He moved out of my apartment and got his own place. Nothing fancy. A small, modern apartment near the office. But it was his. He furnished it himself. He kept it clean. He cooked for himself. He built a life that belonged to him. And slowly, carefully, he started dating again. Not anyone from the Ochoa world, just normal people. Engineers, teachers, accountants. People who didn't care about his last name or his connections or how much money his ex-wife's family had. People who saw him for who he was. I kept working, kept managing my rental properties, kept my life simple. But something had shifted in me too. I'd spent so many years being invisible, being just the bookkeeper, just the mother, just the woman in the background. But standing up in that ballroom, looking Rodrigo Ochoa in the eye and telling him the truth, that had changed something. I realized I was stronger than I'd thought, that I could be strategic, that I could fight, that loving my son didn't mean just protecting him from pain. It meant teaching him how to protect himself, how to recognize abuse, how to walk away from situations that diminish him, how to choose dignity over comfort. Vicente and I have dinner together every Sunday now, usually at my place. I make the foods he grew up with. He tells me about his work, about the places he's traveled, about the problems he's solved, and sometimes he thanks me. He thanks me for that night at the party, for calling Mauricio, for standing up when he couldn't stand up for himself. And I tell him the same thing every time. I tell him I didn't save him. I just reminded him of what he already had. Strength, intelligence, worth, those things were always his. He just needed to remember them. And sometimes we talk about Sophia. Not often, but sometimes. He says he wonders if she ever thinks about what happened, if she ever regrets not defending him, if she's happy. I tell him it doesn't matter. What matters is that he's happy, that he's free, that he's building a life based on respect instead of fear. There's an old document I keep in a locked box in my closet. It's Vicente's birth certificate, and next to it is his father's death certificate. And next to that is the settlement agreement from the insurance company. And next to that is the deed to my rental property. And next to that is a letter I wrote to Vicente years ago when he was still in school that I never gave him. In the letter, I told him that his father would have been proud of him, that he was everything we'd hoped he'd be, that he was kind and smart and worthy of love. I wrote that letter on a night when I was scared I wasn't doing enough, when I was scared I was failing him. But I didn't fail him. I raised him to be good. And when the world tried to punish him for that goodness, I reminded him that goodness is strength, not weakness, that the people who try to break you are the ones who are already broken, that surviving with your soul intact is the greatest success there is. It's been 3 years now since that anniversary party. Vicente is 32. He has a life he's proud of, friends who respect him, work that challenges him, and peace, real peace. Not the kind that comes from having everything, the kind that comes from knowing you can lose things and still be okay. The kind that comes from knowing your worth isn't determined by other people's opinions. The kind that comes from choosing yourself, even when it costs you, especially when it costs you. And I look at him now, at the man he's become, and I know I did what a mother is supposed to do. I didn't protect him from every pain. I couldn't do that. No one can. But I protected him from losing himself. And that, in the end, is all that really matters. Sometimes I drive past that hotel in Polanco where the anniversary party was held. I don't do it on purpose. It's just on the way to other places. And every time I pass it, I remember that night. The silence when Mauricio stood up, the shock on Rodrigo's face, the feeling of Vicente's shoulder under my hand when I told him we were leaving. And I remember something else too. Something Rodrigo said to me a few weeks after everything happened. He called me. I don't know how he got my number. He said he wanted to explain. He said I'd misunderstood, that he'd been trying to teach Vicente the value of hard work, that he'd never meant to hurt anyone, that I'd ruined his family's reputation over a misunderstanding. I listened quietly. And then I said, Rodrigo, you're lying to yourself. You knew exactly what you were doing. You enjoyed it. You enjoyed having power over someone you thought couldn't fight back. And the only thing you regret is getting caught. The only thing you're sorry about is that it cost you something. But here's what you don't understand. My son is better off now than he ever was in your world. He has his dignity. He has his future. He has himself. And you can't take that away from him. Not anymore. Rodrigo was silent for a long moment. Then he said, "You have no idea how hard it is to maintain control in this world. How many people are waiting for you to slip. How much pressure there is to show strength all the time." And I said, "Then maybe you're in the wrong world, Rodrigo. Maybe you built a life that requires you to be cruel to survive. And maybe that's not strength. Maybe that's just fear." He hung up on me, and I never heard from him again. I still see Christina sometimes. At the market. At church. We don't speak. But I see her looking at me, and I wonder what she thinks. If she knows what really happened. If she blames me for the end of Vicente and Sophia's marriage. If she tells herself some story where her family are the victims and I'm the villain. Or if, in quiet moments, she wonders if she should have protected Vicente too. If she should have told her husband to stop. If she should have been brave. I'll never know. And I don't need to know. Her conscience is her business. Mine is clear. Vicente asked me recently if I regret how things turned out. If I wish he'd stayed married to Sophia. If I wish he'd found a way to make it work with the Ochoa family. And I told him the truth. I said I regret that he had to suffer. I regret that he had to learn the hard way that not everyone who says they love you actually knows what love means. But I don't regret that he got out. I don't regret that he chose himself. Because the alternative would have been watching him slowly disappear. Watching him become a ghost in his own life. And I couldn't have survived that. So no, I don't regret any of it. Not the confrontation, not the divorce, not the pain. Because pain that leads to freedom is worth it. Pain that leads to truth is worth it. Pain that leads to a better life is worth it. There's a young man who works at the coffee shop near my apartment. His name is Daniel. He's about Vicente's age. He's studying engineering at night while he works during the day. A few months ago, I overheard him talking to another employee about struggling to pay tuition, about being tired all the time, about wondering if it was worth it. And I thought about Vicente, about all the nights I stayed up late doing extra bookkeeping so I could pay for his school supplies, about all the times I went without so he could have. And I went up to Daniel after his shift and I introduced myself. I told him I'd overheard his conversation and I wanted to help. I told him about my rental properties. I said I needed someone to help manage them, collect rent, coordinate repairs, keep records, just a few hours a week, but enough to help with tuition. And the pay would be fair. He looked at me like I was crazy, like people didn't just offer help to strangers. But I wasn't a stranger. I was someone who understood what it means to fight for an education, what it means to believe that knowledge and skill are worth more than money or connections. He took the job, and now every week when he gives me the reports on the properties, I see a little bit of Vicente in him, the same determination, the same hope, the same belief that hard work and integrity will eventually pay off. Maybe they will. Maybe they won't. The world isn't always fair. Rodrigo Ochoa is still rich, still powerful, still respected in certain circles. Bad people don't always lose. Good people don't always win. But here's what I've learned. Winning isn't about destroying your enemies. It's not about revenge. It's not about making the people who hurt you suffer the way they made you suffer. Winning is quieter than that. Winning is your son waking up in the morning and going to a job where he's respected. Winning is him laughing at dinner. Winning is him dating someone new and not flinching when she asks about his past. Winning is him telling you he's happy, really happy, for the first time in years. That's winning. And we won. I keep that invitation in a drawer, the one from the anniversary party, the thick cream cardstock with the gold lettering. I don't know why I kept it. Maybe as a reminder, maybe as proof that it really happened, that I really stood up in that ballroom and told one of the richest men in Mexico City that he was wrong, that he was cruel, that my son was worth more than he could ever understand. Sometimes I take it out and look at it, and I remember how scared I was that night, how my hands were shaking when I got dressed, how I almost didn't go, how I almost convinced myself that it was better to stay quiet, to not make waves, to let Vicente handle it his own way. But I went, and I'm glad I went, because mothers don't just raise children. We fight for them. We strategize for them. We make hard phone calls and uncomfortable alliances, and we stand up in rooms full of people who think they're better than us, and we tell the truth, even when our voices shake, even when we're terrified, even when we know there will be consequences, because that's what love looks like, not the soft kind, the fierce kind, the kind that doesn't let anyone, not even powerful men in expensive suits, diminish the people we love. Vicente told me last week that he's been offered a partnership at his firm, a junior partnership, but still, he'd be part owner, part of the decision-making team, real equity, real voice. He said yes, and when he told me, his whole face lit up. He said, "Mom, I'm going to be okay. I'm going to be more than okay. I'm going to be successful on my own terms, not because I married into the right family, not because someone gave me a chance out of pity or obligation, because I earned it, because I'm good at what I do, because I work hard and I treat people with respect, and that matters. It actually matters." I cried when he said that, because for so long I was afraid the world had taught him the wrong lesson. I was afraid he'd learned that kindness is weakness, that honesty is foolishness, that the only way to survive is to be like Rodrigo. But he didn't learn that. He learned the opposite. He learned that you can be kind and strong, that you can be honest and successful, that you can refuse to compromise your values and still build a good life. And that's everything I ever wanted for him. There's one more thing I need to tell you. About a month ago, I got a letter, hand-delivered, no return address. I opened it carefully, and inside was a short note. It said, "Thank you for what you did for Vicente, for standing up for him, for showing him what real love looks like." It was signed simply, S. Sophia. I don't know what she wants from that letter. I don't know if it's an apology, or a confession, or just a moment of honesty. I haven't told Vicente about it. I'm not sure I will, because she had her chance to stand up for him. She had a year of chances, and she chose her father every single time. So her regret now, if that's what it is, doesn't change anything. It doesn't undo the damage. It doesn't erase the humiliation. It doesn't give Vicente back the year of his life he spent on his knees scrubbing toilets while his wife looked the other way. But I kept the letter anyway, tucked in that drawer with the invitation, because maybe someday Vicente will want to know that she understood what she lost, that she realized, too late, that choosing cruelty over love has consequences, that some doors, once you close them, don't open again. I'm 63 now. I still work. I still manage my properties. I still have dinner with Vicente every Sunday. But I'm starting to think about the future differently, about retirement, about what I want the next chapter of my life to look like. And I realize I'm not afraid anymore. For so long, I was afraid of not having enough, afraid of losing what little I had, afraid of not being able to protect Vicente. But now I know something I didn't know before. I know that the most valuable things I have can't be taken from me. My dignity, my integrity, my fierce love for my son. Those things are mine. And as long as I have those, I have enough, more than enough. And if I've taught Vicente anything, it's that your worth isn't in your bank account or your job title or who you're married to. It's in who you are when no one's watching. It's in whether you can look yourself in the mirror at night and be proud of how you lived that day. It's in whether you stood up for what was right, even when it cost you something, especially when it cost you something. So here's what I want you to take from this story. If someone you love is being diminished, if they're being slowly erased by someone else's need for power, don't stay silent. Don't tell yourself it's not your business. Don't convince yourself that they need to fight their own battles. Yes, they need to be strong. Yes, they need to stand up for themselves. But they also need to know they're not alone. They need to know someone sees what's happening. Someone believes them. Someone will stand with them when the moment comes. Be that person. Be the voice that speaks truth in rooms full of lies. Be the hand that reaches out when everyone else turns away. Be the love that refuses to let cruelty win. Because that's what saves people. Not money, not power, not status, just the simple, fierce, relentless love of someone who refuses to let them be destroyed. If this story has touched your heart, subscribe now, leave a like, and tell me in the comments what city you're watching from. That helps us keep sharing stories of strong women, families, and the unexpected turns of life.